national polls show the frontrunners more or less holding steady. Plus, we are looking at how the Democratic presidential hopefuls appeal to different age brackets.
Team Rising is here to dive into all of this. Daria Dawson is a Democratic strategist, and Holly Turner is a Republican strategist. She previously served as an assistant administrator in the U.S. Small Business Administration. Welcome to you both.
Good morning.
Thanks.
So,
Great to see
very
you, ladies.
interesting. We've got this tri-poll. We got a poll trifecta over the weekend.
We've been in a little bit of a polling desert.
Yeah, I know. I think
Floodgates had to open
they're
at
kind
some
of
point.
screwing us over because they dropped them all at the same time. But luckily, that means that we can talk about it here. So, average of the three polls, basically, Biden is generally up at the top, 27 to 30% range. Elizabeth Warren in the 23 to 21. Bernie Sanders remarkably consistent, showing 19% in all of those. Buttigieg also in a relatively fourth place. Klobuchar basically replacing
But is it a strong
Kamala
fourth
Harris.
place?
Yeah, I know.
That's the real question.
A very, very strong fourth
7%.
that he holds there. I mean, Daria, what is your main takeaway from this poll? What do you think?
I am actually surprised at the Klobuchar-Harris switch.
Right.
Now that I'm
that's
looking at it
interesting.
again. I mean, Klobuchar has been out there sticking with her message, making really good talking points. And I'll be honest, a couple of times that I've seen her talk, I've been very impressed with her work. But again, I think this just shows us that we still have 3 months, 2 months to go, that these polls and these, anyone could flip-flop over anyone. How do you call that? Hopscotch or leapfrog or whatever.
All of that.
All of the above.
is what could happen in the next couple of weeks.
See, I kind of take it the opposite way. I mean, even though you have a little bit of variation between these three polls, and always good to say these are national polls, which is not how people actually vote, but you get a sense of where people are generally. They're fairly stable. You've got a fairly steady 1, 2, 3 here, whereas before the debate, Elizabeth Warren was taking the top spot in a number of polls. So it seems to me that her momentum has at least slowed, if not actually reversed.
Yeah, it's plateaued, but it is important to point out that these are national polls, right?
Yeah.
And so we go into these first few states, and these numbers matter, but also cash on hand matters because you've got to mobilize your people that support you. So that, Biden's 27% support, whatever it is now in Iowa, it's probably not 27%, but he's got to get all those people to go out and caucus for him, and he's running out of money. His donors are not re-upping again. So again, interesting, but after those first couple of states, and Biden's already saying, well, we don't have to win Iowa, it'll be okay. But after the first few states, that's going to, this will change.
Everybody hold your thoughts, because I have a lot on this one.
This is going to change fundamentally.
Okay, let's stick with the poll in particular, though, because what I think is very interesting is that this Buttigieg number, that 6 or 7%, I really think, Daria, that a lot of this is coming from the fact that Kamala has basically collapsed. So a lot of her white liberal support is basically gone to Elizabeth Warren and to Pete Buttigieg. And as those two kind of duke it out in particular, I mean, I do think it leaves her vulnerable because the media narrative of the last 2 months has been like Warren surging. But now, if she's already gained whatever she can from those Kamala voters, where else is there to gain from? What do you think? Yeah.
One thing I want us to be very careful, particularly when it comes to Kamala Harris, is she's the only black woman in this race. And the black women are the most loyal supporters of the Democratic Party. Whether they're with Harris, I've heard some places they're with Elizabeth Warren, she's shaving off those votes. I think we really want to be careful with that narrative about telling the only woman of color to take a step back. I still think it's going to be a ground game in Iowa. I mean, as you see, she's putting a lot of resources. They're all in for Iowa.
Well, she closed up shop essentially in New Hampshire.
In New Hampshire, New Hampshire may have gone to Bernie or to Elizabeth Warren anyway. But I admire the fact that she is still playing in Iowa. If you watched her this weekend, she had a marvelous time. You could just see her just enjoying the moment and having fun. And I think that's what it's about. I still think it's still going to come down to the voters in Iowa, the caucus goers, when it comes to first choice or second choice. And I think she probably still could pull out a top 3.
What do you make of the fact, though, that if you ask African-American voters, and this is generalizing, but older African-American voters tend to support Biden, younger African-American voters tend to support Bernie, and she hasn't found a whole lot of traction in that demographic?
The whole thing about, we could go to this conversation about Biden saying that he doesn't need to win Iowa, maybe counting on South Carolina to be his firewall.
Yeah.
I'm still not too sure about that. I still think that Biden, Harris, Booker, could, those two could be an X factor for him in South Carolina. I'm not a young person. I know I look young, but I'm not young. I'm not a millennial. And I don't get it with the 70-year-old white man attracting to young African Americans.
Well, we have
I want to
some numbers.
dissect. Yeah, I would want to dissect that a little bit
We
more.
pulled out
Yes.
this Michigan Democratic primary, which is very interesting, which shows Biden and Sanders at the top overall. But the generational divide here, Holly, is insane. Bernie Sanders wins 73% of voters under 30, and Joe Biden, it's the exact opposite, right? He wins very few voters under 30 and a majority of voters 65 plus, where Bernie Sanders very much struggles. And if you look, I dug into all of this morning because I find this stuff super fascinating. Elizabeth Warren does best with voters in that next age bracket, like people like my age in their 30s. Pete Buttigieg does best with like the boomer demographic, like 50 to 64. But I thought that Bernie Sanders number 73% was just sort of astonishing.
It is, and it's been that way, though, for 5 years now. It hasn't changed. I mean, last cycle, during the primary, he had that kind of support. And it's remarkable. It's special. I mean, that is something super special, and I think I attribute it to his authenticity and his consistency over the years. I do not agree with a thing that the man says, but he is consistent, and people respect that. And he's, they feel like, all right, this guy he's not going to, be a typical politician to us, and he's shown that he doesn't do that.
Well, and Derry, if you ask this group,
if I can, I think it's also about his talking points, free college for all, and, the Green Deal and everything. I think issues that young people actually care about that's resonated with them. But I think this is we could talk a little bit more when we get to the Pelosi piece about what's far left. When do you make that pivot when it's time for a general election?
And that's what young voters will tell you. Of all the age demographics, most of the age demographics are more focused on electability. Young voters are more focused on the values, on the principles, on the ideology. So it makes sense that they see someone where there's a close fit, and conventional.
But there's not that much difference between between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren's policies.
Right.
They're fundamentally the same, but yet look at the difference in their
It's about
support.
execution, and it's about trust.
It's about trust.
Well, we want to talk about execution. I mean, what has he actually done as a senator? We're going to talk about real execution. How many laws has he actually passed? How many of his proposals have
Amazon
actually
to up
become
their
law?
minimum wage to $15. That was kind of a big
But
deal.
that was
he's led the entire
also-
Democratic Party to embrace Medicare for all, universal health care.
Well, that
seems like kind of a big deal.
When it comes to the $15, let's also give credit to SEIU and that Fight for 15 movement, where he latched onto it. So let's just be careful.
But I
about
think,
that piece.
don't you have to agree, though, that he has really led the ideological direction of the party?
Absolutely.
I mean, you look at free college.
pushed the party. I will
you
give him
look
that.
at Green New Deal. You look at Medicare for all in particular. I would say that that's a lot of impact.
All
but
of
it
the
speaks
major-
to, it speaks to, I think your point is his theory of change is different than Warren's. And so when you say they're fundamentally the same, the way that they want to go about making that change is very different. And so Warren, she has more of the insider, let me work the levers approach, and Sanders has let's bring the coalition and change the
silent
Overton
revolution.
window.
Right.
Yeah. So I think those are the big differences. All right, we got a lot more we want to get into, though, with these ladies right after this.